Okay guys, we're gonna go over how to measure out your boards here. So what I've got here is a line drawn at 22.5, and notice that I put a check mark onto the waste side of the material. That's the side I don't want to keep. My saw blade has a thickness to it, right? And that's what creates sawdust. We're actually subtracting material. So unlike cutting a paper in half with scissors, where when we cut it in half we still have the same length, just two parts, every time we make a cut we actually lose part of the board to sawdust. And so we don't want to lose any of the board that we care about. We just want to lose it on the waste side. So I would go and I'd line up my saw blade when I go to make my cut. The saw blade here is lined up with this notch. So this notch is an indicator of where the saw blade actually is. And so when I put that notch on here and when I ultimately make the cut, I want my saw blade to be on the waste side of that line. So that way I don't make my board too short. So I'm gonna go and make a couple other marks on here so that way you guys can see me measure this out. So what I have here is my tape measure, and I'm riding it so that way this reveal on this side of the tape measure, the amount of wood I see, is the same. I don't want to measure on an angle because, as you'll find out this year, that changes the length of my measurement going in this direction if I measure on an angle. So I want to measure parallel with my tape measure to the edge right here. And so when I go to measure, let's say I want to do 12 and 5/8 of an inch. I would go and find 12.5 first, so that's right here, 12.5, and then I got to add 1/8 to that, because 12.5, if you can see that, is the same thing as saying 12 and 4 out of 8 parts. And so I need to add 1/8 to that to get to 12 and 5/8. So what I'm going to do here is I got 12.5, and then I have a 16th line and an 1/8 line. So 12.5 plus 1/8. So that's 12 and 5/8 right there at that line. Now that I've made that line, I can go and take a tool called my speed square, and I'm going to use the short edge of the speed square against the short edge of the board, like that. Now when I slide it, I can transfer a perpendicular line. So I'm going to go and put my pencil on my mark, bump to my pencil, trace straight down. That's my line. And if I want to double check that I did that right, I can double check the bottom. That's 12 and 5/8. And then I want to put a check mark on my waist side of the line so I know which side to keep my saw on. And then I can write on this board 12 and 5/8. So that way we know how long you cut it. So now when I go to actually make my cut, I can go and hold at least 6 inches away from the board, line up my saw and make the cut. Here I have some blocking put in, so it'll help keep it steady for me. I'm going to have that notch on the waist side of the line. I'm going to press down the safety to turn my saw on, and I'm going to make my cut all the way through. Now is a good time to talk about circular saw safety. So I'm going to take the battery out as I make adjustments to the saw. To do that, I just squeeze and pull out on these side wings here. Now this saw here has a blade that's round, and it's determined by the diameter of the blade. So this is a 7 1/4 inch blade. This is the table. And so this table, depending on its height, reveals a certain amount of blade. And so here you can see that my tooth is set up to be a 1/4 inch beyond the board. And so in order to kind of eyeball that, it's about 1 tooth should be sticking out past the depth of the board. That allows me to cut all the way through the board without putting myself at extra risk of blade exposure and not being too light on the cut either, where the blade doesn't go all the way through. And then the other thing I want to take note is that this is a circle cutting a plane, and so if I don't cut all the way through, I'm going to leave part of it left behind. From the top it looks like we're cutting way more than what's actually cutting all the way through on the bottom. So make sure you cut all the way through your board when you make your cut. If I needed to adjust my depth, I do that right here with this lever. And now this lever's on a spring. When I spring it out, I can move this handle without actually turning anything other than the handle itself. Once this handle's actually in, that allows me to loosen it by going up. Now I can change how much of the blade is exposed. And once again, I have my battery out. If this was a corded circular saw, I would have it unplugged for safety. The fastest way to do this actually though is to have your material on hand and to check and see how much of the blade is sticking out. We want just 1 tooth sticking out. So This is the blade guard. I pop that up so I can see everything. Once again, it's unplugged so I can't accidentally pull the trigger. It's 1 tooth beyond, and then I'm gonna hold it steady and I'm gonna clamp that down. I'm gonna double check it one more time. So that's 1 tooth beyond and it's clamped down nice and tight. If I couldn't get it tight enough, I can spring that handle out and I can go and I can get a little extra leverage on there to clamp it down some more. So now that's all set. This also has a bevel to it so we can tip the blade. We typically just keep it right where it is, so don't bother adjusting that. But if for some reason this saw was not square to its fence or its table, we can adjust that. And so it looks like this one actually is slightly out of being square. And so what I'm going to do here is keep my speed square on this. It's held tight to the table and we want to make this blade nice and perpendicular to it. And so this clamp does that adjustment. So I'm going to go and loosen this up. There we go. It's been a while since that moved. And once again, the blade's out, or the battery's out, so we can't accidentally start. I'm just going to go and tip that blade right to where I want it, and then I'm going to go and clamp that back down. So now we can cut perpendicular to the fence. Okay, and then when I'm done with the saw, I can rest it on its table. Put the battery back in. To operate this saw, since it has a battery pack, it has a safety switch up here, so you have to push that down on either side and then pull the trigger. The blade should be nice and tight in here, and if it's not, call a teacher over because we can use this tool to adjust the blade and make it nice and tight. All right, so now I want to go and cut my lines. So I want to make sure I'm holding at least 6 inches away. I have it nice and secure so it won't wobble on me. I've got my notch on the correct side of the line, and then I'm going to watch through this little window where the blade is. I'm going to take a nibble out of it, I'm going to back out, see if I like where I'm at, and then I'm going to cut all the way through. When I cut through, I want to keep my wrist steady. If I move the saw, it's going to twist, it's going to bind up, it's going to want to maybe come back at me. So I want to make sure I keep it nice and straight all the way through the cut. So I nibbled in, I can see where I'm at. So if I want to come a little bit more towards my line, I can. So I'm going to do that. So I'm going to find the notch, back it off, move it a little bit more towards my line, and now I'm going to make my cut all the way through. The whole time I was listening to the saw, if I hear it whining, that means I'm twisting the saw. So here's what I want. I want to keep the line, and I want to make sure that I cut right up to it. If I lose the line with my saw blade, that means I've cut just a little bit too much. So here I can see that I'm right where I want to be. And now I'm going to do that one more time over here for my 12 5/8 cut. And now this is just an example. Now when I cut this board is going to become shorter on that side of the line. I'm going to keep my notch lined up. My blade's good. Now when I go to start the saw, I don't want the tooth touching the blade. I want to back it off a little bit, let the blade get up to full speed so it can cut through the wood. Otherwise, if I turn it on now, the wood might be stronger than the blade and it's going to want to come back. So I'm going to get it really close, bring it back, turn it on. My hand was 6 inches away the whole time. That gives me enough time to react in case something happens. And then now I have my cut. I've cut my line just barely at 12 5/8. And so that should work out just fine for what I need. Okay, so that's making a cut with the circular saw. Once again, checking your depth, checking that it's square. With your speed square, you don't have to do that every day, but if it seems goofy, that could be why. This one has a safety on it, keeping your hand 6 inches away. When you make your cut, go all the way through, go straight, take a nibble first to see where you're at if you're not sure. Use the notch to help you, to guide you on your line and look through the window. And then also make sure to keep your wrist straight and that you don't twist it as you go through, because that would give something called kickback.